tell us about your music when you were a wee girl.
There was always a piano in the house, and I would play with the piano, and it was in the basement. There were a lot of centipedes there, but it was fun to create scary music low and then frightened little running away music. But I was starting with keyboard lessons when I was 4, which I walked to, and I still remember my very first piece, C, D, E, or 1, C, D, E, D, 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 and then the bass and da-da-dum, C, D, 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 D. I'm probably not at C anymore, my voice has dropped. But I wasn't fond of practicing, and so I would sight read through my lessons. But I could read music, and
pipe organ.
it went from piano and then pipe organ. So I went to that, and I like things about it, but it's not the music I wanted to play. So I sight read through my pipe organ lessons. I enjoyed the pedals, and again, not to. My parents tried to make me practice. They tried their best, but I was a difficult daughter, and so they would even get me up in the middle of the night, like on a school night, 2, 3 in the morning. They were working all the time. My mother would, sleep very little and work at home, but they'd get me up to practice, and of course there's everyone else sleeping, so I'd play very loudly. And there was a pipe organ in the house. My father had bought one and built a house to put it in, and he had bought an old grill that opened up. There's a pipe room so you could have the 16-foot pipes in and shutters and open them, and so I'd make it very loud and pull out all the stops to practice in the middle of the night, you see, because they'd gotten me up. And another practice trick was during the day would be to have the book open, but I'd have a book I was reading there, and I'd pretend I was practicing something with one hand or the other, or a foot passage while I was doing what I wanted to do, and if I heard someone coming along, I'd turn the page and cover up the reading. So.
But how did you get into Irish music then?
I heard music, popular music of the day. I like Bach well enough. I like some of his things, the trio concertos and things like that. I thought that was fine, but it wasn't music I wanted to play. But I wasn't really very fond of more modern, like Beethoven and stuff like that. I liked blues music. I liked rock and roll. I wasn't very fond of early folk. It was too nice or something like that. But what I didn't like about the rock and roll that was going on was the very strong bass lines, rhythm guitar, bass guitar, loud drums. And I actually spoke. I was able to define what I didn't like about it and wondered, couldn't there be music where the melody contained rhythm, the melody contained elements of the harmony? And then I had my very best friend at the time that I'd met through riding horses. She ended up getting together with a musician, a rock musician who also composed his own music, and they went out to Boston and started getting asked to play Irish tunes, Irish songs. And they ended up liking them better than the music they played. And so I inherited their, they were at an estate sale and bought, it was an early copy, but it was an early of all 3 editions of Bunting's Ancient Music of Ireland. So the, 1796, 1809, and 1840. And I read it, and it was Bunting's description of the harp players that just fascinated me. And
And so were you looking for a harp then, or was it chance that you found one?
No, it wasn't chance. So I wanted to get a harp, and I was looking, and I only had Bunting. No internet. We're talking 73, or actually 71 when I started with this. And so it really took me over 2 years to find an instrument. And that wasn't really long at all. I mean, today you can order an instrument and it can take If it's from certain car makers, it can take 7, 8, 9 years. But there weren't any to be had, but I had Bunting's drawing, like of the Trinity, and I thought if I could take this to a luthier, a picture of this, or to a cabinet maker, maybe I could have one made. But I was a horse trainer, and I think I figured out I was earning like 37 cents an hour working. I worked 6, sometimes 7 days a week, 14-hour days, and didn't have much time, and I taught myself to play the tin whistle. And so played that in a Cayley band led by Martin McHugh from County Roscommon. He'd been playing with Irish immigrants that were older than him, and they had Parkinson's and died off, and he was sort of left alone, and we met him. He was at O'Gara's bar, and he was at the bar singing under his breath, "Step It Out, Mary." And then we found him, and he, nice button accordion player. So, and I will say what's very funny is that growing up, and before this, as maybe 10, 12 years old, there were 2 instruments I disliked. And one was pedal harp, and one was piano accordion. And it's because they played music that embarrassed me, schmaltzy, corny, And lo and behold, my husband is a button accordion player. And I became enamored with the Klarsuk. So I like underdogs kind of too. It's something different, unique. And so it was a description that I never heard one. And it became a year-long thing. And I finally, Jay Witcher in California started making harps, and he did so because people came to him with pictures, Renaissance or medieval pictures of harps, and say, "Can you make me one of these?" Because they were doing the Ren fairs, you see, and that sort of thing.
So you found the harp in the music shop, and you bought it on the spot?
Well, yeah. Jay is in California, but Charlie from Chicago was in the Irish music scene and folk music scene there, and he had friends in St. Louis who ran a music shop, and they found Jay Witcher at something he was showing harps in, and they bought 3 harps, early harps of his, and he heard about it. And it was right at that time that, we were galloping with a bunch of horses in the field. I was a horse trainer, riding instructor. I did dressage and eventing, jumping, and it was a young horse, and the young horse sort of leapt a little bit into another, and then stumbled forward and went down to his feet. And I went down, and he ran over me, and he clipped my ankle. Well, I got on out there and rode back, and then I thought, and it ended up I had a broken ankle, and I'd wrecked up this leg, so they put a splint on this leg and a cast on this one, but it meant I had a little vacation. So I remember I packed my suitcase, and it was upstairs, and I threw it out the window and went down the stairs on my bum and drove myself to the airport and went to Chicago. And Charlie had a gig that night in Chicago, played till 3 in the morning, and then you go out with the Irish crowd, we'd go out to one of these all-night Greek restaurants and have a meal, and we'd drive them home because they were going off to work at 7 in the morning, and then we pretty much, we slept a bit, and then went down to St. Louis where this music shop was, and the very first time I heard a metal-strung harp was that he had 3 harps. One was a Cyr copy, one was a Lamont copy, and one was a Trinity copy. And these were made from measurements given in Robert Bruce Armstrong's Irish and Highland harps. But Jay was an engineer, or is an engineer. He still is, he still makes harps. And he made other early music instruments. He plays music as well. He worked on the acoustics of vibrating things. He worked like something for the moonshot, a deep sea diving thing, all sorts of different things. And he realized that he didn't like the string lengths on the low-headed harps. And so like on his Trinity harp, instead of having 29 or 30 strings, he would copy the shape, but put fewer pins in so that it didn't graduate, so it was wider spacing and would fit folk harpers and other harp players better, and it had better sonority throughout the range. And I didn't tune with Nicoli strings then. I knew about them, I had bunting, but I also honored the harp maker and how I knew he had designed it to be this way, so I didn't mess around with springing at that time. And at that time he asked me, do you have any complaints about the harps or things to do? Anyhow, the harp I bought and the first harp that was on the Otway was the first string I played, and that's the instrument I bought.
And was that instrument that you first came to Ireland with?
Yes.
So tell us about the very first trip to Ireland with the harp.
Oh gosh. I had a case made for me, and it was a fiberglass case. It sort of looked like a big vacuum cleaner or nose or something like that, and there were wheels on it, to wheel it. And I brought it to Ireland, and then...
Did you have gigs lined up, or...?
No, not at that time. We would, we'd made money playing in bars. The pay in bars is still the same, except it's only 1 or 2 nights a week, and we would have 5 nights, and you'd play from 9 to 1. So you had all of this playing time 5 nights a week, and you
what kind of tunes were you playing?
Carolyn backing up songs. It was with a 4-piece band, and I wasn't really needed, because there'd be, guitar and sitar or accordion and concertina. There's a flute player, 2 singers, So I could fit in as I could. So it was sort of, it was easy that way.
And so how often did you come to Ireland like that? Was this an annual thing? Or?
Yeah.
And when was it?
Starting after I got, in 1976 was my first. Charlie was coming here since 74. And we'd go out to Connemara, out to the West Coast. There were people in Chicago that had emigrated from the area of Tarna who were good friends, and their parents were at Chak na Tra, and they ran Irish language courses for kids during the summer to live there, and it was really fun. We would stay there, and like Charlie would help Dado. He'd bring in the potatoes, and they had a donkey, and with the baskets on the back, and we'd go out, and Charlie would help dig them, and he didn't really know where to put this. He's not a natural farmer. He didn't know where to put the spade, and he'd chop the potatoes in half, but those were good for seed potatoes. So, but it was really lovely, and we'd do that, and then we'd go to sessions at night, and there was, Max. Well, there's this great pub, and we'd go to, and Shuffle would come in. He lived on an island, and when the tide was right, he'd come into the bar. But Josie Konjak, wonderful, wonderful traditional Shawano singers would come in, and we'd play music, and they were like, okay, they couldn't believe that we would be playing Irish music and making a living on it in the States. It's like, what do you do for real? Maybe it's because we weren't very good. But anyhow, they would, and it would go late night, and I think the pubs were supposed to close at 11, but we had special dispensation, and it could go all night. And then we'd meet with another guy, would come into the kitchen. He'd been barred for most of the pubs, but he was a great flute player and singer. Charlie got Sheeta Lamoy he got Sound of Rimula from him.
And did you ever meet other harpists on these trips?
No, not at all. No harpists. And in my mind, I romantically I thought they're going to hear the real harp, and there's going to be this ancestral, this magic connection with people on the sound of the instrument. Yeah, I wanted that. I wanted to start right in there. But people didn't even know the word Clarsha or Crit. It wasn't part of the landscape.
It was after a few years of this that you went to Granard?
Yeah, it was with Granard what happened. So that's 1981. So, 5 years down the line kind of thing, yeah? And Granard took place about a decade before the Belfast Harp meeting. And
so this would be 1780s, 1770s? It would have been, it was the 200th anniversary, wasn't it?
Was
So
81.
1781.
81,
In
82,
Granada.
83, and possibly other years. It gets, what happened, Dagman, what's his first name? He was a businessman who, he was from the area, from Granada area, and went to the continent.
But tell us about when you went to Granada.
When I went to Granada, I wanted to be there because to me it was an historical event. But I didn't believe in competing in music. You know, I competed with horses and I understood what that was for and for their training. But I didn't think that the music got trained by going to these things, you see. And so I didn't like it. And then there were friends of mine, Pam and Phil Boulding from the States, nylon harp and hammered dulcimer. And they wanted to play, there were a group competition, and the only way Pam could play was if we had four in a group. So they asked me to play with them, and I had like, thou shalt not compete in music. Another one was, thou shalt not say no to friends to play music with them. You see. So I decided, okay, you have to play, and then I realized it was actually there that I said yes, because I realized that no one would hear the instrument. Everyone was on nylon strung harps. And so I thought, okay, you know, so you do it. So yes, I competed. And actually, who was there at the competition was our friend Rosen.
Ah, Tristram Robson.
Yes, yes. And he had a metal strung harp there, but he really wasn't playing very much, but he was there.
Excellent. I didn't know that.
No? Oh, okay. So Tristram was there.
This is Tristram Robson, who bequeathed us his books, which are over there on the low shelves.
Mm-hmm. And the judge, the adjudicator, was Grania Yates and Charles Gard. And do you know who Charles Gard is? He's a fellow from Man, yes, very good, Paul, excellent. And a very good musician.
And he arranges a lot of music, I think, doesn't he?
Well, he played metal strung harp, he took lessons from Grania Yates.
Anyway, so what happened when you competed?
Oh gosh, you know, the room, it was a school hall and a school auditorium in there, and it was jam-packed, SRO, the whole time. And the tuning was out in this long, dank, cold hall outside, and all of the gut players are going boing, boing, and tuning away, and I didn't have an electronic tuner, I didn't use it, yeah? And I also had never really played alone and didn't compete in music, and here I was, and it was a big moment for me, and I had I can't remember exactly what I played. I played a slow air, it might have been the Kulin or something like that. And I played the set dance of the Three Sea Captains, and I had really nice variations with it, you know. And when it went well, it could go very well, and I played something else. So I got up there and played. The harp was in horrible tuning, because I got in there, and as soon as I got in this hot hall, and I couldn't tune out there anyhow, it was pathetic, and then it wilts in this hot hall because the metal strings, the temperature changed. And I started to play, and my hands, you know, they did this thing. Some of you have been there, yeah. and you know, I championed on best I could, and I broke down on variations of the Three Sea Captains. I just broke down, not crying, but musically broke down. And what I knew from competing was in horse shows and horse events. And when there's judges there, if you wanted to be excused from the arena, you would ask permission. May I please be excused? So that's what I did. I addressed the Grania and Charles Gard were right there. And they said, no, you may not. So I finished up somehow. I was so embarrassed. I was so humiliated. Not for me, but I had let down the Irish harp. I was doing it for the harp, not for me, yeah? And I was just horrified. So I went out and tried to regain, but I'm tough. And so the hall was filled, and I thought, okay, they're gonna announce the winners. And there was a big, long time. Everyone, you know, thought, why is there so long for the winners? And I went out to get a tape recorder from the car, because I didn't believe it was right to record the competition, but I thought to get the recording of the winners was okay. So I went out and I couldn't get in the hall because it was so crowded, you know. But I finally made my way in, and I was sitting there, and they announced the 4th place and the 3rd place and 2nd place, and I was just done. And my name was called for 1st place. And I just about died because I had played so horribly, and there were really wonderful players, like Janet Harbison, Norina Donahue, who played, I mean, you're talking really good, competent lever harp players playing brilliantly. And here I was, and oh God. And so I went up and I was like, I don't deserve this, I don't deserve this, sorry, I don't deserve this. And went up there and accepted the award and really felt terrible. And they made this announcement after they said they awarded it because it was the most interesting music. I mean, it was what really got them. They liked it, so it went that way. And I went back the next year to sort of redeem myself. And that time I played better, I played well, and there wasn't as much competition, and I ended up winning that. And then I went back the 3rd year because I'd grown quite fond of Granard in the audience, but I didn't want to compete because this was a new cup. It was a Father Gilfillan's cup, and my name was the only one on it. And as I knew from traveling trophies, if you'd won 3 times in a row, it was retired. And I didn't want to do that, so I didn't compete. So that was fine, but then when they gave awards, they ended up giving me a crystal vase anyhow, because I
just for showing up.
Yeah. And then the next year they brought me back to adjudicate. And they were really, really sweet.
When did you first start teaching Julio Sharp?
Well, gosh, I don't know.
Do you remember who your first students were?
No, not at all. I think it was probably in workshops and while traveling. See, it wasn't at home with a student who would come to my house. It would be more
Would it be here or in the States?
in the States. It would be in the States, and I really don't remember.
Because I think you have had a lot of students and a lot of influence on. Were you teaching before you wrote Secrets?
Oh yeah. And I gosh. I'm growing fuzzy here with Secrets. Secrets came out at a time when we paid a lot of money for someone to typeset the pieces. And I had grand ideas about having overlay pages. So you'd have the music, right? And then you'd have an overlay page which would show you all the damping to be done, you see, which would show the difference. And, sort of like, medical books or something like that. But it was way over the top. So I ended up not doing it, but it was so expensive to get this person to do it. And that's just the time when computers finally, I didn't want computers because I was afraid it would sort of affect poorly the thinking process and writing process. I don't think that's really correct largely, but anyhow, it took me a while, and then being able to typeset music, so Charlie did it. There's a fair bit of typos in there.
Talking about computers, tell us a bit about your research trips before you could go online and get manuscripts and facsimiles.
You have to realize that we did not have a house or an apartment, and we were married in 1976, and we lived totally on the road. We didn't have any house payments, any utilities. We paid our petrol and car bill and went to phone bill, but no cell phone. So it was really hard to do business on the road and do your publicity and get mail and all of this. But somehow we would manage. So we made 3 major trips to Belfast, other ones, but where we'd stay like a week and copy down from the manuscripts there. And Charlie and I managed to get our hands, thanks to, I don't even know her name anymore, a librarian in the States, I won't even give the city, who ended up getting, I got a whole set of the microfiche that the Bunting manuscripts are on. And so we had them printed out en masse. And we had double sets printed out, and I gave a set to Grania to thank her. Grania was always kind in getting together and talking, and I visited at their home in Dalkey, she and Michael, and also out in, not Carrow, in, or maybe, yeah, a really lovely place there. So the research, so various, also the National Library in Dublin. So our trips cease to be so much to the Gaeltacht anymore, where we've done, but really we went purposefully to Queens and to Dublin. And meeting Grania, that was the first time I'd really met and communed with and we got together sometimes and cooked up some, I showed her some schemes I had for possible fingering for things. And I also, in secret, I ran that by her, and she looked at it, and I did the tune of Fair Molly, Butterfly, and I had Burns March, yeah, but I didn't, and she thought that Burns March was too hard and I needed more music. So I increased exercises based off the hand position, and then I added a tune, The Yellow Goat, which is Kiss Me Lady in Bunting, which has features of Burns March, and it's sort of like a practice thing before hitting the big one. So that's what I used that for.
And finally, before we wrap up, tell us about when Siobhan first asked you to come here for the first Skol na Glasgow.
Well, let's see, we moved, I know.
This is zooming ahead, right?
Yeah, 3 kids, yeah. My youngest was about 3.5, about 4 years old, and she's 26 now, so 22 years ago. I got a letter from Siobhan, and I didn't know her, and she said I'm this historical harp player, and I finally dawned on me that I should be playing the harp of my country, and can I come take some lessons from you? And she said, I remember hearing you play when I was a wee girl. I think she used the term, or maybe she was young, I don't know. And she heard me at Granard playing one time, and I was there in a row, so I don't know which time it was, but maybe a later time, because, with like when I adjudicated their end, but doing a concert, that kind of thing. So she came out, and she arrived, and she was really ill. She had some sort of stomach bug, and she didn't want to tell me that. And she was in her room and sleeping. I was like, come on, let's go, let's work on it. And Siobhan was just, a total whiz. So I think, and she made 2 different visits, I'd say 4 days each, and it was really fun. And Siobhan, so generous, she left behind in the room US dollars saying, buy a fax machine, with this money. And we still have that fax machine and use it.
And then she asked you to come here?
Yeah, and I was on Siobhan because it worried me. I mean, I didn't want to do harping big in the States because I didn't want it to be a US and American thing. It had to belong here. And I was afraid that if it got too big elsewhere, that it would be impossible for Ireland to ever feel ownership of it, It was really important to me. And it bothered me a bit. I mean, and so I was looking to come here, and this was in '92. I was I was up in Scotland, and Nelson Kinnaird talked with an arts person up in Ross and Cromarty, and they said that if I came over there, they would give me a building to teach in and have lessons in if I went there. And I thought, great, right on. But I was 7 months pregnant at that time. And so, great, wonderful. And then I came to Belfast, and there I met Cyril Killen, and he made money. He invented a machine that duplicated the knitting of Aaron's sweaters and all sorts of designs. His daughters are harp players. And he was talking about, what if we bought the Alderford? He thought of buying Alderford, and I was telling him about a harp center, that I wanted a harp center, and I thought, boy, it could be bass, I thought Carolyn, and he said, what about Alderford? And it was like, wow, he's such a pivotal figure, you know, from sort of the Baroque continental music and laments and words. You could have Irish language, there's some dance things, you could have early dance here, you could have harp making here, you could have tourists come and listen to Planksty Kelly, you know, and have a fancy drink and sandwiches with tourist glasses. You could have conferences, harp deals, yeah, okay. So, I thought that, but it all went by the wayside, and I can't remember the question. We're done, I think.
I think that'll do. We're here. It's